Good afternoon. My name is Alexa D'Addario with the Canadian Science Policy Centre. Joining me today is Dr. Kate Moran of Ocean Networks Canada. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Moran. How are you?
I'm fine, and thank you for having me here.
Yes, and on behalf of Canadian Science Policy Centre, we really appreciate your support and the support of Ocean Networks Canada. So I guess my first question is, what do you believe are the most pressing challenges facing Canadian research today?
In terms of the research itself, the challenges for conducting the research is having the facilities and the infrastructure and the funding to actually do that research. And the way that it's been moving along in the last, I would say, 15 years, it's continuing to get better. And that's what we're seeing here at this conference. We're actually seeing that investment that's been made and the results. And so we're seeing not so much of a challenge recently.
That's great.
Yeah.
And how do you think Ocean Networks Canada and its infrastructure are there to meet those challenges?
Well, we're an operator of ocean infrastructure, and ocean infrastructure is probably one of the hardest infrastructures to operate because we're in corrosive water, high temperatures, low temperatures. We deploy things at sea where you're seasick quite a bit of the time. And we have to use actual robotics to actually install and operate our infrastructure. But that said, once we get it installed and operating, then we support research in ways that I think no other infrastructure operator does, because we provide all our data in real time over the internet. So the researcher basically sitting in their laboratories at home or in their kitchens at home using the data and conducting their research. So it is a magical way to conduct research. You're actually in the ocean, but reaching it. It's basically an internet-connected ocean.
Wow, that does sound magical. I was just wondering on the policy front, what role do you think policy plays in shaping national research interests?
Well, I think it goes two ways. First of all, at Ocean Networks Canada, we develop new technologies that then push policy. So, for example, we developed an earthquake early warning system. Canada didn't have one before. That actually informed the government to say, oh, okay, we need to have some policy around this. How do we further develop it and implement it? That's just an example of research efforts can actually push policy. In terms of the other way, how policy informs research, much of it is associated with basically the goals of the government. And at Ocean Networks Canada, we look closely at the mandates of each of the federal ministries, for example, departments, and then we focus our priorities in addition to supporting research, so let's make sure that's our foundation. We then support other priorities of the government that we can do. So then we become what we're now calling major research facilities. We start to become basically an integrated national major research facility across the country. So if each of us does that, then we'll be supporting the nation's goals.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. So how do you think researchers can engage effectively with policymakers?
Well, that is a very good question. I think it would be really important to have researchers in their early career, maybe during their master's degree, to spend time as an exchange in one of the policy offices, either in the provincial government or in the federal government, because the realization for researchers of the significance of policy to change the world becomes a reality.
Yeah.
Policy rules the world. And so when researchers have that knowledge, they can then focus their research to actually either move the policy, develop the policy, or enable it to work better. So I think it's quite an important aspect that this organization can help. It's a wonderful, this conference is wonderful, and I spent some of my time in the U.S. Office of Science and Technology Policy, and I came in, obviously as a researcher, and I became extremely aware of how important policy is, and that has changed my world. And I've brought that knowledge to Ocean Networks Canada, and it really has changed the organization to really be agile in the face of policy.
Yeah, and we really appreciate it. So I got to ask, what do you think the impact on research is from Budget 2024?
Well, the biggest impact was the framework for major research facilities, as far as I'm concerned, and it's wonderful. It's been worked on for a couple of years, but now we actually have a framework that allows the major research infrastructure or facilities, whichever you want to call them, a future for them. And so that provides stability for someone who's starting their master's or PhD. They know that as they move forward with their research, they will have the facilities needed to complete that research, and then it continues on. So that stability is very much appreciated, and it will strengthen Canada.
Yeah. On the diversity, equity, and inclusion front, what is Ocean Networks Canada doing to promote underrepresented groups in oceans research?
Okay, well, we have a large team of learning and community engagement where there are many Indigenous staff in our organization. And also, we have a very diverse staff across many different kinds of categories, I'll put it that way. But our Indigenous staff and our Indigenous programs are, I think it's one of the areas that makes, excuse me, let me start again. Our Indigenous staff and the work we do in Indigenous communities, whereby we're transferring technologies to coastal Indigenous communities so they are empowered with their own ocean front yard knowledge, their own data. And that gives them power to be at the table with government or whoever to say, here's what we know about our ocean front yard, and here's what we want to do about it. Just that work, which we're now doing on all 3 coasts of Canada, actually, I think makes most of our staff very proud.
Yeah.
And there's a richer understanding of the importance of diversity and traditional and Indigenous knowledge. And so, for example, we now have teams combining data from our data, like modeling of tsunamis, with knowledge from the leadership of First Nations communities about tsunamis, the history of them, combining them into a product like a documentary.
Yeah.
And that is so much more powerful than a 50-page report. And so when we bring those 2 things together.
So, and finally, I have to ask, what do you believe is the role of the Canadian Science Policy Centre as a knowledge mobilizer, a talent incubator, and a connection hub as a landscape in science and innovation policy?
Well, it plays a critical role. As I mentioned earlier, connecting the research community scientists with policymakers is the magic.
Yeah.
That's how we innovate. That's how so when policymakers want to get from here to there and they understand there's a solution over here, they can actually accelerate that. At the same time, the research community can actually communicate directly with the policymakers about as you asked earlier, what are the roadblocks for you? How can we ensure that you can stay on the innovation train? So it's a wonderful marriage, and it should continue.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kate Moran. It was great to talk to you. That was Alexa D'Addario with Dr. Kate Moran of Ocean Networks Canada for the Canadian Science Policy Centre. Take care. Thanks.